For the past few weeks, Claude Opus 4.7 has been completely driving me insane. The exact thing it kept doing that was, almost getting me to just throw it all away was I would give it like a big job, a real one, whatever it may be, writing workflows, content, or actually building software. And then, maybe there'd be a bunch of smaller little subtasks that need to be done during that job. But like all the way through this job, Opus 4.7 would hit one of those pieces and go like, you know what? It would even tell me, it would say, you know what, this matters, but we don't need to deal with it right now. We'll come back to it later. It never came back to it. It would never come back to it. It would just keep building on a foundation full of holes, and it messed everything up. This was true for my writing workflows, content, software building. Same thing every single time. I was this close to walking away from Opus 4.7 and considering switching over. Somebody who has been from day one pushing Claude. Everything I do is built on top of Claude. I was really that close. Well, then Opus 4.8 dropped yesterday, and so far that problem is gone. I'm super impressed with what they have shipped. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, now that it's been about 24 hours that I've been able to test it out a bit. So I run my entire business through Claude. If you probably know by now, this includes my newsletters, my client work, products I ship. I do all of it solo, with one tool since day one, 0 employees. So whenever these new things drop, like a new model, a new Claude model, I don't really review it by just reading the blog post and looking through all of that. I literally just go right in before even reading the blog post. I just go right into Claude. I update my Claude app, and I toggle it on and just pick up my workflows right where I was, even sometimes right in the middle of it, and see just what, I can just eyeball the difference, A and B, just by feel, right? So I want to give you my honest, day one verdict. It's been about, like I said, 24 hours. So I'm going to tell you what I'm seeing right now. And then, I'll tell you later on if it sticks. All right. And I'm even going to show you something that was really impressive that it did this morning, and that I wasn't even expecting. So the thing that really broke me on 4.7 is exactly the thing that they wanted 4.8 to fix. So let me be straight with you about how bad it actually got. 4.7 was incredibly lazy. It always wanted to stop. It would, like I said, it would find the hard subtask in the middle of the job and then quietly just decide it wasn't important or just forget about it. It would punt it. It would keep moving and then leave me with this end product that was like completely built on BS, and not stable or just not what I wanted or just bad quality, because the foundation it was building underneath was never actually finished, right? You can see the benchmarks here on the screen of this misaligned behavior, and you can see the huge difference between 4.7 and 4.8. On top of that, it would straight up forget things, constantly. I was always re-explaining context that it already had over and over. Well, 4.8 just straight up handles it a lot better. It takes care of the thing in the moment. It doesn't punt the hard part and pretend that it'll come back to later. It always is focused on, at least in my experience over these 24 hours, it is completely focused on building what you're doing in the moment, and making it real without, punting to later. And then whenever something does need to be remembered for later, it actually remembers it a lot better, without me having to tell it, without me having to yell at it all the time to keep track. It saves its own memory files. It keeps track of everything. It updates my context and all of that, right? So there's a piece of this that Anthropic put numbers on too. The model is a lot more honest about its own work. It flags the shaky part instead of just burying it. Now, you could see here, pulling right from their blog, it's far less likely to bury its own mistakes with misaligned behavior. 4.8 sits well below 4.7. Here's a little note that they wrote. Opus 4.8 defaults to high effort, which we judge to be the best overall balance of quality and user experience. On coding tasks, this effort level spends a similar number of tokens as Opus 4.7's default, but with better performance. So users can also choose between all these different modes now, including extra or extra high in Claude Code or max, and then the model spends more tokens to get better results. They recommend using extra for difficult tasks and long-running workflows. They even increased rate limits and all of that, okay? Now, that all sounds small, but it's not small, because when you run an operation on this thing like I do, the worst failure isn't necessarily a wrong answer. It's a wrong answer that is delivered to you with total confidence, that you might not catch until it's 3 steps downstream. Now, this is obviously dangerous to me, but it's even more dangerous to people who don't know about this, right? And take the AI at its, face level value. Me, I always keep an eye out for that. So I try to double check things that I think that the AI might, get wrong or say it's confident in when it's really not. So all of that is kind of largely, or a lot better or solved with 4.8, right? Because if you have a model that raises its own hand and says, this part's weak, Now that's something you can actually work with and trust in your workflows as an operator. Now, another really key point with this model release here is the fact that it follows my system. It actually follows my system, right? And the whole game for an operator is whether the model follows your system or not. And 4.8 seems to do so. I'm talking about your Claude.md. I'm talking about your system instructions. I'm talking about, your context files that you pointed to, the entire system you built. We're not just using vanilla Claude here, where we have a system built inside of it. We have instructions telling it what to do, right? And this is the one that matters the most for how I work. Like I said, I don't use Claude right out of the box. It's only powerful when you start adding everything into it. So I've got skills, I've got context files. I have an entire system that's supposed to follow it, and 4.7 followed it really well, and it followed it, mostly well. But it drifted, and it drifted a lot more than I would like it to. So I would constantly have to drag it back. This wasn't the case for Opus 4.6. Before 4.7. 4.6 in many ways, in my opinion, was way superior than 4.7. And I have a feeling that's why we only had 4.7 for about 6 weeks before they just dropped this new 4.8. All right. Well, 4.8 is staying in the lines up until this point. So here's some proof or just a little example I wanted to show you that happened today. So I have a publishing system, for the workflow I use to produce like these videos that you're watching right now, right? The point is for me to, take my own research and topics that I find, run them through this system, this workflow, where I get, my video brief, and then from there I get a transcript written in my voice for me to follow. I get this HTML presentation. I get thumbnails for my YouTube. I get a accompanying text to use for my Substack newsletter with the video. All of these different things, right? And I wanted to rebuild it properly with 4.8. So I sat down today and I built the entire thing into a working Claude skill from start to finish. And I literally could do it in about one shot, about 15-20 minutes clean. And it worked incredibly well. This is kind of what you're looking at here. These are some screenshots from my work today. So I literally told it, we're going to build out the whole workflow, the whole SOP. And once we finalize it, you're going to bake it into a plugin or skill. So I just kind of threw everything at Opus 4.8 and told it exactly what I wanted from start to finish. I asked it to build it into a SOP. It built out a spec document. And then that I turned into an actual Claude skill that now I can invoke every day or every time I want to make a video on something, and it will do so. So for example, you could see here it built out the design spec, and then after this, it shipped out the transcript or the skill. And that's exactly what you're watching here. So, for example, I had the Opus 4.8 release. I gave it all my personal notes about my experiences. I gave it screenshots and all of that. And it built it into the skill that now I can, replicate over and over again. So it did this really, really well. Better than 4.7 ever did, better than 4.6 ever did. And I really did not have to change much inside of this at all. It handled it, basically in one shot. So that told me that, it's following its instructions. It's following a lot of instructions. It's following them fast, and it's not losing the thread once. All right. And that's the principle that, my whole brand runs on, or a lot of my businesses, my channel, for example, this here, the tools get better. And as these tools get better, your system gets better. So I don't have to rebuild from scratch. I already had the groundwork. I kind of already had this process built out. But now with 4.8, it just comes in and just makes it so much better with a lot less work, right? So the stronger model just makes everything I already built land harder. Another main key point in my personal workflows with 4.8 that I, felt necessary to talk about is that it sounds good. It writes good, way better than 4.7. So the voice adherence, in my experience, jumped a lot. And that's like my living. That's what everything lives on, right? I have a voice skill that I run all my content through, whether that's like my own content will run through my own voice skills, stuff I produce for clients, like in ghostwriting for CEOs, or if I'm writing for a publication, or if I'm writing marketing material for a brand. Every single one of those separately has their own voice skill that the content has to go through and Claude has to use to write. All right. And that's fundamental to everything I run here. Right. It's how Claude writes as me or a brand instead of generic AI. 4.7 followed it, but followed it loosely. Oftentimes I would get something back that was half me, half, vanilla AI. and I would have to launder it, but 4.8 follows it a lot more closely with even less edits on my end. The content comes out sounding really good, like I want it to sound, like me, like a brand, like a client, right away with very little edits. Okay. So for somebody who runs their entire operation on skills, in voice, in context, that's not a feature bump, right? That's the entire system getting more reliable and better and more valuable overnight with this release. Now, I did want to touch on the benchmarks a little bit that we pulled in here up at the top. Now, the benchmarks are up across the board for coding, agentic computer use. They're all up, and they are the same price as 4.7. Now, I don't make decisions, on benchmarks. I've talked about this a lot before. A chart like this, or like the actual benchmarks, which I didn't even pull in here, can tell you how a model did on someone else's test, but it really doesn't tell you whether it's going to, work for your own workflows. For stuff like when I'm working here, a lot of times it's focused heavily just on these developer measurements and stuff like this that it's just not, I just don't even like to pay attention to it, because sometimes you can have a model with the best benchmarks, like they talked about with Opus 4.7, and it can work horribly half the time. And other times the benchmarks can be not so good, but it worked great. So really, the only thing I do is test it on my own work. It's the only source I trust. It's the only source you should trust. It's someone like me testing it on my work, or you testing it on your own work. So we're not going to pay that much attention to the benchmarks here. Now, another really cool thing I wanted to talk about that it did for me this morning was, and just all around what it seems better at doing, is taking initiatives. All right. So just a little honest framing here really quick. I'm not sure if this is completely new. I'm not sure if anybody has seen this before, but I'm almost positive this came in with 4.8, because I've never experienced it before. It's never happened to me. So what you're looking at here on the screen is me working on something completely unrelated inside of Claude. I was working on my SaaS platform and community, which I have. And I was working on, I don't remember exactly what it was, but I was working on a piece of content and having a conversation with Claude. And then out of nowhere, up in the top right of my screen, popped up this little suggested task in the corner on its own, uninvoked. And it like proposed a complete build on my own platform of a specific feature that it was like kind of recommending based off the current conversation I was having. So it was saying, hey, you're talking about this right here. Now, let me make that relation to the platform you have shipped out there, the SaaS platform and community. We could build this into a feature onto that. And that's what it popped up here on the top right. So you could see this little thing was like, build a CWS, which is my co-writer system, logo, library, member, feature, and video. And then, basically asked me if I want to start this. So it did this, and then I clicked, I accepted this, and it went off all by itself and basically one-shotted this specific feature on my platform while I was working on something completely different. And when I went back to look at it, it was like incredibly good. It was incredibly good. It had one-shotted this entire feature on my platform. It had built it all out, and it had shipped it and even deployed it all autonomously without me even having to ask it. So this was the most, this was the most initiative I have ever had a model take when it comes to my own work. And in my experience, which is this one that I did here, it worked incredibly well. It wasn't some bad work that it just threw out there to ship. It was something well thought out and well planned out that actually made it into my final, platform within, I don't know, 20 minutes or so as I was working on something else. So that is incredibly powerful, incredibly powerful. And it's the direction that this is all heading into, right? So it's going to be less of a tool that we are operating, and it's more of a tool that is just operating alongside of us autonomously as well, right? So it's something to keep in mind here. Now, another thing that they shipped alongside all of this is dynamic workflows inside of Claude Code. Now, these basically, a short version is that Claude can now spin up an entire fleet of sub agents. We're talking like hundreds of sub agents to split a big job across them and then run in parallel. Probably one of the most powerful features they have ever introduced here. With that said, it is also more of a developer move. It is, for coding, for working on massive code bases or whatever, where you need hundreds and hundreds of agents to do these different things. So I'm not going to camp on this right here. I'm not going to focus on it in this video because it's not something I've tried out yet. It's not something that directly affects my workflow right now. But as time goes on, of course, I'll be exploring this and seeing, where it makes sense to use, and then, bring that to you as well. But it's definitely something that you should keep an eye on, and a lot of people are talking about it. All right, so what is my final verdict on Opus 4.8? Well, it blew me away. It really did. It really did. After a few weeks of going genuinely crazy with 4.7, I mean, I'm telling you, I've been like so stressed over these past few weeks with 4.7, running in circles, building on bad foundation. If anything, this is an incredibly refreshing breath of fresh air. It takes me back to the good days of Opus 4.6. If it's that excitement I have when I try a model for the first time, and my entire system and output and workflow and everything just gets better overnight. That is really exciting whenever you experience that. So it handles all of the hard stuff in the moment. It doesn't punt things to later. It doesn't forget things like 4.7 was doing. It remembers. It follows my system a lot better, and it sounds a lot like me and my clients when using voice skills. Now, full honesty though, full disclosure, it's been a day. It's been like 24 hours. A day can feel incredible right up until week 3 when the shine starts wearing off. So that's what we're going to pay attention to. That's what sometimes happens. But this is what I am seeing right now, and I will tell you if it holds. I hope it does. But it is the first model in a long time that feels like a true, real upgrade and not just some number that they threw on benchmarks, but really a better partner for operating. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe. Drop a comment below if you have any recommendations for things you want to see or your experience with 4.8, and check out my Substack as well, which is linked below, where there's a lot of written material and resources and newsletter as well.